Cartier is responsible for some of the most recognizable wristwatches in the history of horology. In today's deep dive, we are taking a closer look at one such example, the Cartier Tank. Let's dive in. The definitive expert on watch design, Cartier has always been a leader in challenging conventional approaches to watch design by pioneering new styles as a fixture in the broader fashion world. Few watches have played a larger role in solidifying this brand identity than the Tank. Undoubtedly the most iconic watch in Cartier's history, and conceived based on a simple idea, the Tank has evolved to take on a myriad of forms over the years, with over a dozen sub-designs with their own identity and personalities. In spite of the popularity of the Cartier Tank, there's still relatively little comprehensive information available for collectors. In today's deep dive, we're going to demystify this important model, first reviewing its inspiration and history, and then moving on to cover the various forms the Tank has taken over the years. Let's get started. The first Cartier Tank emerged in 1917 based on the vision of Louis Cartier, the grandson of Cartier's founder Louis-François Cartier. With France in the midst of World War I, the war effort played a significant role in shaping the styles of the era. Louis Cartier called upon military influences to help shape his designs, specifically a French military tank, the Renault FT-17. The modernist tank introduced a relatively progressive military vehicular design. It was brilliant that Cartier was able to translate the aggressive aesthetics of a military vehicle into one of the most classy dress watches in history. The very first Cartier tank was the Normale. Although the watch itself was rectangular, the dial was square, with case sides that double as the bezel and are referred to as brancards. These early tank models featured flat-top brancards, maintaining the Renault-influenced tank aesthetics. These brancards were made to call to mind the look of the tracks on a tank's flanks. Many of the other foundational design attributes of the Tank were introduced and solidified on the Normale, including the Roman numeral dial, blued steel hands, sapphire cabochon crown, and railroad minute track. In the beginning, Cartier's Tank was viewed as somewhat rebellious. It wasn't clear that the model would be successful, since many considered its look to be overly progressive and potentially heretical. That said, with time, opinions swung to the opposite extreme, as many other brands scrambled to join the rectangular watch game. Today, there are dozens of Cartier Tank designs, but the Tank Normale broke the ice, laying the foundation upon which every other tank built its reputation and aesthetics. In 1922, Cartier introduced arguably the most important tank in history. The Tank Louis Cartier modified several attributes of the Tank Normale, elevating the angular look of the Tank Normale to present in a more elegant way. Instead of the squared brancards with flattened tops and sharper edges that were characteristic of the Normale, the Tank Louis now had rounded brancards with much more shape that helped to contribute to an overall more delicate presence. This new design language became the standard aesthetic for the Tank. Another important change on the Louis was that the watch was now elongated, losing the square dial of the Normale in favor of a rectangular layout. The idea of the iconic Tank as the classy rectangular men's dress watch comes from the Tank Louis Cartier. It could be argued that nearly every rectangular watch is in some way influenced by the look of this timepiece. In 1921, Cartier ventured into further uncharted territory and introduced the avant-garde Tank Cintree. The new model line featured a cambered profile, elongated case, and stylized numerals. To maintain wearability in spite of the broader wrist presence, Cartier scalloped the case back to conform with the wrist. The dial side and crystal were also curved to match. To further underscore the curved aesthetics of the Cintree, Cartier elongated the Roman numerals on the dial as well as the railroad minutes track, distorting the typeface intentionally to highlight the distinctive profile of the case. The Tank Cintree is a niche product. It's a funky design to be sure, but one that should be handled in person in order to be truly appreciated. In Europe in the 1900s, a new trend was emerging, with greater Asian influence on both architecture and fashion. The 1922 Tank Chinoise returned to the square dial of the Normale. Unlike the Tank Normale and Tank Louis Cartier, which have two brancards on either side of the dial, the Tank Chinoise had four, with upper and lower brancards overlapping the sides. The inspiration comes from the porticos of East Asian temples. These entranceways have large pillars and decorative tops, which is said to be reflected in the overall layout of the case design. Next up is a rather obscure variant that's less well known than the models we've covered thus far. The 1928 Tank à Guichet was reserved for a very small subset of VIP clients, including both Duke Ellington and the Maharaja of Patiala. While the Tank à Guichet features the brancards of a Tank Normale, this is where the similarities between the models end. The Tank à Guichet features a digital jump hour display, unlike anything else in the collections. The rest of what would be the dial of the watch is the same metal as that of the case. This means that the tank is armored much like a battle tank, the inspiration for the original Tank Normale, as we mentioned. Other than the original small production beginning in 1928, 6 more examples were made in 1996, followed by a 150-piece limited edition in 1997, and finally another 100 examples in 2005. Thus, all told, it is estimated that less than 1,000 examples of the Tank à Guichet exist in the entire world across all iterations and generations. Therefore, when these come up for sale, they are both highly coveted and in turn highly priced. While Cartier certainly set the stage for rectangular watches, there's one timepiece the Maison produced that seems to rest in the shadows of another, and that is the Tank Basculante. For context, in 1931, Jaeger-LeCoultre rolled out the Reverso, designed with a special flipping case mechanism that would allow the wearer to protect the watch crystal while playing sports, specifically polo. Just a year after the release of the Reverso, Cartier launched the Basculante. The Basculante also featured a flipping mechanism, reversing the dial and case back top over bottom within a frame, and achieving the same effect as the JLC, albeit through a different method. The Basculante is certainly a controversial piece. Many feel that Cartier never should have ventured into this territory at all, but we believe that this piece has a distinctly Cartier identity to it, with the tank's classic dial layout and an underlying elegance that matches many of its other models. Furthermore, in actuality, Cartier did in a way beat JLC to the punch, because as early as 1926, the brand had launched the Tank Obis Savonnette, which had a cover that hinged over the dial. Several other beautiful details are present on the Basculante. In spite of the fact that this piece has lost its ordinary crown position, it's moved to 12 o'clock to accommodate the hinged case, a blue sapphire cabochon is still incorporated. Furthermore, many references feature full guilloche dials. These dials are finely finished, so much so that upon first glance you might not even notice that guilloche is present at all. In the sunlight, however, these dials pop. The Basculante is a beautiful design and has been revisited rarely by Cartier, most notably around 1997 in the collection Privé Cartier Paris. Our first complicated piece in the mix, 1935's Tank Monopoussoir chronograph, demonstrates that in addition to killer design, Cartier has put out some watches with notable movements as well. A monopusher chronograph is incredibly complicated to execute properly, since all functions, start, stop, and reset, are controlled from a single pusher, which in this case is also the crown. It was imperative for Cartier to opt for this system, however, in order to maintain the minimalist design of the tank. Typically flaunting a guilloche dial, the Monopoussoir chronograph only interrupts the typical tank layout to add chronograph dual registers. Much like the original Normale, the Tank Monopoussoir has beveled edges on the brancards rather than the rounded ones of the Tank Louis. The movement in these pieces was quite important. Caliber 045 was conceived by a world-class team of developers, including F.P. Journe, Denis Flageolet of Debetune, and Vianney Halter, in order to prevent the chronograph hand from jumping upon activation, as is incredibly common on vertical clutch chronographs. The Caliber 045 was instead given a clutch system alongside a swivel pin, which ensures crisp operation without jolts. This is a very serious movement to match a very serious watch. For a slightly different take on a tank chronograph, consider the 2013 Tank MC Chronograph. Launched with Cartier's first in-house automatic winding caliber 1904 MC, it does away with the monopusher and embraces the traditional dual pusher style. Whereas the Tank Monopoussoir chronograph is a dressier model, the Tank MC has a decidedly sporty quality in spite of its precious metal case. When Cartier first presented the Asymetrique in 1936, the last tank released during Louis Cartier's lifetime, it was not intended as a tank model at all, but rather as a standalone timepiece referred to as the parallelogram. The goal was to target the driver's market with an off-kilter dial. Over time, however, the ever-increasing success of the tank collection as a whole, the parallelogram was later rebranded as the Tank Asymetrique in 1996, making for one of the funkiest models in the generally traditional collection. People continue to love the more playful take on the classic Tank Louis, and as a result, these have done quite well. Some references, particularly newer versions, feature a triple lug that looks almost like a belt buckle and is meant to stabilize the strap. This detail is not extended to every example, but it does add an extra level of intrigue to the design language. Furthermore, many older models featured the Guichet dials we have come to know and love from Cartier. Today, most have satin sunburst or even skeletonized dials. Next, we fast forward all the way to 1977. By this point, several dynamics have changed within the watch industry. Firstly, the Tank had been around for over 50 years and was already considered an icon. Further, the quartz movement had recently been pioneered by Seiko, raising serious concerns about luxury brands' ability to compete with the pricing of less expensive battery-powered models. Cartier's response was the 1977 Mousse de Cartier collection, a line that remains in production to this day. A number of alterations were made to the Tank in order to create a more affordable alternative to the mechanical models that the Maison was offering. Mousse de Cartier models now featured either quartz or ETA-based mechanical movements. Additionally, rather than being made of solid gold, the Mousse line featured gold plating over a silver base. This helped to dramatically decrease cost on these watches without abandoning the designs or surface aesthetics of the successful models. Although the quartz crisis passed and Cartier maintained its status as a high-end product manufacturer, the brand reintroduced the Mousse line in 2021 to keep a more affordable option for collectors. For those who wish to explore the Tank collection without investing in the conventional precious metal and mechanical movement options, the Mousse line provides an optimal solution. Next up is another classic within the Tank family, the Tank Americaine, which was introduced in 1989 as a modernized version of the Tank Cintree. Slightly less extreme in its architecture than the Cintree, it still preserves that model's defining curved case. The early Americaine examples were quartz-powered, with either a subsidiary seconds or a moon phase at 6 o'clock. These early references didn't prove as popular as Cartier hoped, but interest peaked when the brand launched a larger men's piece with a mechanical movement in 1993. Unlike the Cintree, which was curved front and back, these Americaine models were practically flat on their caseback. Following their 1993 success, Cartier began producing more and more variations in more metals. Tank Americaine models suddenly had chronographs, tourbillons, and more. In recent years, the Americaine has contributed to enjoy a special popularity. As a sort of more affordable Cintree, it has garnered a slightly younger audience. Inspired by the Tank Normale, the 1996 Tank Francaise returned to a square case design while adopting a more modern presence with a steel link bracelet. This sportier presence means that it can work well as an everyday offering in both casual and dressier environments. Its bracelet, made to look like the tracks of a tank, also calls upon the heritage of the greater collection. In terms of market positioning, the Francaise occupies a more accessible spot in the catalog, where its purpose is to provide a good entry point, particularly for women, into the greater Cartier repertoire. Most models thus feature quartz movements, although some of the larger models incorporate automatic calibers. There's no doubt that the core of the Tank family will always remain the Tank Louis Cartier, Cintree, and Americaine. That said, the Francaise provides one of the few opportunities to access the Tank DNA for a fraction of the price. Released in 2012, the Cartier Tank Anglaise is by far the most modern of the Tank designs. A much bolder case profile with thicker brancards, chunkier wrist presence, and a slight curve help distinguish this model from other Tanks. Additionally, Cartier embedded the crown within the right brancard in a rather unique manner. One can speculate as to why this was done, but we'd wager it has something to do with preserving the symmetry of the case. The dial, with its guilloche background, Roman numeral indices, and date at 3 o'clock, could easily have been placed within any Cartier timepiece. This blending of new and old Cartier design is notable, and based on how well the combination works, we see that even as the Maison updates aesthetics and provides new options, they never truly stray far from the core of their philosophy. Rather than seeming anachronistic, the Anglaise works really well. When the Cartier family arrived at its third generation, the three brothers divided the responsibility of managing their vast empire. Louis, the oldest son, took over the Paris branch. The middle son, Pierre, oversaw New York, and the youngest, Jacques, kept his eye on London. In addition to serving as satellites for Cartier sales purposes, the three locations also served as production bases for the Tank and other collections. In Paris, the French flagship produced the Tank beginning in 1919. Louis managed the operation from 1903 until 1942, and during that period, movements were supplied from JLC, Piguet, Piaget, and later the THA. Since Louis was truly the father of the Tank, which was his brainchild, tanks that are stamped with the Paris hallmarks on the dial or on the casebacks are especially desirable in the present day. The New York location didn't start producing tanks until 1921. At that time, Cartier and Guichet formed the European Watch and Clock Company, EWC, from which they supplied their movements until the 1960s. In 1962, the New York branch was sold outside of the family to the syndicate that owned Black Star Frost Ltd., a Fifth Avenue jeweler. New York clientele was particularly enamored with the more fashion-forward tank designs, and thus the Cintree was often sold there. Similarly, the Tank Americaine, which represents the modernized Cintree, was named for the American division, specifically for this reason. London was by far the latest to join the show, and Jacques actually never oversaw tank production, though England did manufacture tanks beginning in the 1950s, which were made almost exclusively with JLC calibers. Upon Jacques' death in 1941, his son Jean-Jacques Cartier took over management and ran the boutique until 1974. He was quite enamored with the tank models, working hard to modernize and adapt the design language. He was also the man behind the ever-successful Cartier Crash. As England was a relative latecomer to the tank production process, its output was quite limited over the years, and in turn, English tanks are very desirable. As you may notice, each boutique had a subset of its production that remains highly collectible, making it important to understand where your piece falls in the historical and geographic distributions of production. Reflecting the significant role the Tank Louis Cartier has played in the Maison's history, an equally noteworthy list of celebrities have worn the watch. Andy Warhol, Jackie Kennedy, Yves Saint Laurent, and Frank Sinatra all call the Tank Louis Cartier their own. You'll notice that among the celebrities are a number of important fashion fixtures, which gives even further legitimacy to the Tank as a style icon. As one of the eternal fixtures in the watch industry, the Cartier Tank demonstrates the never-ending appeal of classic dress watches. Cartier has made dozens of small variations on the Tank design language, all while maintaining the underlying DNA of the collection over the course of more than 100 years. If there's one model family that demonstrates Cartier's adapting of an underlying aesthetic to appeal to different markets and collector personalities, it's the Tank. Tremendously diverse, but always identifiable, the Tank remains a definitive classic, and one of the most important and beloved dress watches in history. To learn more about the Cartier Tank, be sure to check out our comprehensive article on transmissions. Additionally, to explore our full range of Cartier Tank models, be sure to head to analogshift.com.